What is fear? The game, not the emotion. A classic? A masterpiece? A decade and a half later, and despite all the games that have come and gone, this one proves itself relevant to this day. What is it that F.E.A.R did that earned it a spot in the video game Hall of Fame? What are its core conceits? How well does it execute on its gameplay objectives? Does F.E.A.R the game even elicit any fear from you, the player? Hell if I knew. I had yet to play it. About time I fixed that. F.E.A.R first greeted the world during E3 2004's pre-show. Monolith Productions' Director of Technology, Kevin Stevens, is quoted as having said that this concept of theirs was to make an action movie in a first-person shooter where you really feel like an action star. And to this day, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who thinks they failed. F.E.A.R is bombastic. F.E.A.R is cinematic. It is bursting at the seams with gratuitous, gory, godlike combat. Gunshots cause a shower of sparks and kick up dust that obscures sightlines, forcing you to reposition when the scene gets too busy. Explosions rock the scene as thunderous kabooms bellow at your eardrums with a power seldom depicted in games. AI squads audibly communicate their actions with a domineering tone as they charge in that mellows out into a terrified one as you systematically paint the walls with their entrails. And it also touts itself as a horror game. My choice of words speaks for itself. While F.E.A.R's action touches infinity and beyond, it faceplants gloriously in its flaccid attempts to spook you out. Be scared, it screams, as it blares that repetitive screech and tries to jump scare you for the umpteenth time in the most monotonous manner possible. Their choice of horror was heavily informed by the traditional mainstays of Japanese horror, seeking to derive dread from a combination of gore and vicious little girls acting as unstable vectors of powers that can't be comprehended or controlled. But nothing new is done with them, and when presented in such an in-your-face manner, they fail to elevate themselves beyond being a tired cliché. And yet despite this, F.E.A.R manages to unnerve during its quiet time. As you roam corridor after corridor, witnessing the aftermath of one-sided slaughters as shadows dance right by the corners of your eyes, footsteps pitter-patter in adjacent rooms, with nothing but suffocating ambience to accompany you. The game's stellar audio design and atmosphere is what sells you on this dread, and it does so magnificently. To the extent that I grew needlessly wary every time I knocked something over, the sudden noise clashes hard against the deafening silence I periodically grew accustomed to. The enemies too play their part in driving the suspense. Noticing certain faces among the crowd can instill dread, as what confidence you had in dealing with the lightweights is suddenly overcome by the walking tank you just noticed. F.E.A.R can elicit a little fear after all. If not by menacing little girls, then by the excellent atmosphere that it builds. And of course, this brings us to the reason such an atmosphere was needed. F.E.A.R opens in as vague a manner as it can manage. A man is kneeling in his cell, watched over by ravens. Enter stage right, a lone grudge-lit. The man screams. An army of soldiers seemingly activate as a consequence. And the slaughter begins. This is where you come in, the point man of a covert special forces unit dedicated to handling paranormal threats. First encounter Assault Recon, F.E.A.R. It's a contrived name, but it's one that no one will actually ever say in its entirety, so we all know why it's really called that. Your three-man cell comprises combat medic and forensics agent Jin-Sun Kwon, F.E.A.R veteran Spencer Jankowski, and you, the freshly minted unnamed rookie. You're tasked with accompanying US Army Delta Force operatives, lovingly christened the D-Boys, to eliminate the man responsible for the carnage. Over the course of the ensuing 8-hour campaign, a number of questions are answered, several more are brought up, and a couple hundred replica super soldiers are introduced to the business end of a VK-12 combat shotgun. Is there even such a thing as a non-combat shotgun? I won't further reiterate what Wikipedia or personal experience can tell you. If you want a rundown of the entire plot beat by beat, you'll have to get it elsewhere. With that being said, let's get started. F.E.A.R's story isn't particularly noteworthy, nor is it one I'd consider worth telling. It elicits little genuine emotion, is built on a mountain of cliches, and can fail to make sense on some occasions. This isn't helped by its apparent pacing issues, which take on a multitude of forms. Levels from the third interval onwards are severely lacking in variety, leading to the impression that the game is dragging on for far longer than it takes to play through it. The increase in difficulty is overall linear, but most of the time you'll be hard-pressed to find an increase in challenge given how shallow its slope usually is. Whatever depth it has as a narrative comes by virtue of its veil of mystery, as it teases out bits of plot via voicemails and the environment. In essence, the story exists solely to contextualize the combat and set a very specific tone for the downtime. And that's not a bad thing. Sure, it doesn't provoke any philosophical musings with regard to the ethical ramifications of experimenting on your kin who is tortured by her innate abilities, nor is it compelling writing, but it serves as a suitable backdrop for an action game dipping its toes in horror that would rather you focus on the gameplay experience with minimal distractions. It provides satisfactory explanations as to why the point man is a blank slate, why there are 1,000 disposable elite soldiers that operate at the behest of a single man, why they all sound the same and behave identically, and it makes itself just interesting enough to be a mystery worth solving since it seldom outright tells you what's going on. And more importantly, it provides a mood conducive to unnerving the player via anticipation. In fact, taking advantage of your anticipation is what drives all of the game's horror. Lead level designer John Mulkey stated, "Creating expectation and then messing with that expectation is extremely important. Predictability ruins a scary mood." This is a paradigm I feel I grew gradually more comfortable with over the course of the game's development, because its horror improves as the campaign goes on. Granted, this is a natural outcome of having more and more time to set up certain patterns and player expectations as time progresses, and then proceed to mess with them. It starts out with a handful of shoddy jump scares and the occasional Paxton disappearing in plain sight, and telegraphs itself quite obviously by playing its cards exclusively when you're in a position that constrains your movement, like waiting in an elevator or climbing a ladder. But it gradually becomes far less reliant on these cheap scares, and starts taking advantage of your expectations to toy with you, continually raising red flags that don't turn up any scares as a means of amping up the tension, as you await the one red flag that does turn out to be real. The sense of paranoia it instills becomes responsible for you creating your own personal horror. Hallucinations involving the grudge-lit are more environmental. Rather than just showing up in front of you, she tends to be present somewhere nearby, just watching passively until you notice her. Like an incompetent G-man. The masterful use of audio and lighting cannot go understated either. The ambient horror tracks may seem cheesy, but I'd be lying if I said they didn't contribute to the atmosphere in spite of themselves. Surround sound plays a key role in getting your ears to pick up at the slightest noise, causing a split second of dread in anticipation of what you'll find as you turn to face the source of the noise. Just consider, for instance, any scene where the replica assassins are involved. The lighting deserves its fair share of credit as well. It takes the form of sharp shadows and blinding lights. Corridors dissolve in a darkness, tempting you to flood them with light from a headlamp that can only stay on for so long. The darkness inviting hallucinations and uncertainty. A facade of volumetric light shafts and fog punctuate the environment, contrasting a safe-seeming light you seldom see against the shadows that you grow accustomed to. It makes phenomenal use of clever rendering techniques to support its visual direction, as its graphics don't just intensify its ability to instill a sense of dread and claustrophobia in the player, but they simultaneously serve to alter the gameplay dynamic by creating pockets of darkness that necessitate the use of your flashlight, which naturally gives your position away, but you offer plenty of respite by way of shadows that give enemies away in turn. And as mentioned earlier, the audio serves to supplement your spatial awareness of any given situation. Its design really reminds me a lot of Doom 3. And fun fact, the game engine used to develop F.E.A.R, Jupiter Extended, was also used to develop, no, not just F.E.A.R 2, but Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, all three of which naturally make use of the same underlying AI framework. F.E.A.R's AI has developed quite the reputation since its release, to the extent that some believe it far outclasses most mainstream releases today. While this simply isn't true on a technical level, I think it's worth examining the features that earned it its fame to begin with. To start off, let's lay down some groundwork. What is an AI? Well, AI stands for Artificial Intelligence. Artificial in that it's meant to represent a simulacrum of thought. At an extremely rudimentary level, it can be deconstructed into a complex if-else block. This paradigm would eventually evolve into the abstraction we call a finite state machine, where the conditions correspond to changes in the state of the game's world, like the player being sighted, a comrade dying, a grenade nearby, and so on, based on which the AI agent will take certain actions. The issue with FSMs is that while they're quite efficient, they tend to function in a repetitive manner. If you'd like the AI to be able to respond to a given scenario in a variety of ways based on environmental context, you need to generate more and more states to account for different branches in logic, which in turn means you spend more time each frame trying to figure out what specialized actions to take. This also convolutes the state machine itself if not organized properly, and is antithetical to the simplicity that defines them. Enter goal-oriented action planning. Where FSMs are defined by the relationships between a condition and the associated response, G.O.A.P abstracts the process by separating the transition logic from the states. What this means is, you can define abstract goals for the AI like kill the target, support another squad member, and group up, and tie these goals to a sequence of actions that comprise a plan, with the plan itself having multiple internal conditions that create spontaneity and unpredictability. Furthermore, it allows for complicated seeming behavior to emerge while remaining highly performant, which is key for a game as fast-paced as this. In F.E.A.R's case, the domain of actions can be generalized into 3 states: go to change location, animate to perform actions that aren't particularly context-sensitive, like shooting, reloading, and crouching, and smart objects, which enables them to interact with certain parts of the environment, like flipping a desk or a shelf over to make cover, crawling under the shutters of a warehouse door, or vaulting over a railing. These 3 states form the building blocks for every single plan the AI makes, with the transitions between them based on various environmental constraints and heuristics that I honestly don't understand the nitty-gritty of. Furthermore, goals are dynamically updated or interrupted based on changes in the world state, prompting new behaviors to accommodate certain ancillary goals. For instance, the AI's main goal is to eliminate you. However, if you pose a valid enough threat to them at any given instant, their priorities will switch to self-preservation, regardless of what's going on around them. Both of these objectives can be abstracted into a single goal: eliminate threat. If they have the drop on you, then your existence is considered the primary threat and you'll be dealt with accordingly. But if you have your weapon trailed squarely on their noggin, that suddenly becomes a more direct and specific threat that's solved by either killing you that instant or getting out of the way. One is harmful to gameplay while the other is immersive. You can guess which one they went with. This dynamic reassessment of goals is what drives the unpredictability of F.E.A.R's AI, and what made it so technically impressive in an era where enemy troops swore by the bum rush, and helps build up this facade of humanity in them. If there are enough of them in a certain radius, they get logically grouped into a single squad, with an acting commander. If you're in one place too long, they'll try and flush you out with a grenade. If you hang by a certain region long enough, they'll start trying to flank you. If you've taken out their commanding officer, they panic and yell for instructions. If you've taken out most of their squad, they start getting defensive and terrified, even responding to status checks with a shut the fuck up. These simulations of imperfection and loss of morale as fights go on are what add to the believability. The AI are never consistently effective. They waver over the course of a battle, panicking when their numbers dwindle, and rising with renewed confidence if and when backup arrives. Their communication also doubles as a warning system, letting you know of their movements and plans a split second beforehand, giving you a precious few moments to reposition and rethink your approach. What I find really interesting is that due to their logical, goal-driven nature, the AI can become somewhat predictable. You can make rough estimates as to when and where they'll try to flank you so you can avoid getting caught with your pants down. Predictability within uncertainty, so long as you're paying attention. And as a result, the AI is anything but unfair. All this is well and good, but even the most robust AI would falter in the face of poorly designed levels. Environments are detailed and branch out into interlinked areas. Exploration is promoted not just as a means to stock up on resources, but an opportunity to find unique weapons and permanent boosters to your health and reflex bar. Combat in F.E.A.R is primarily close quarters, and that's out of sheer necessity. Most weapons are fairly inaccurate, even when aiming with reflex mode enabled. The choice of small, mostly barren arenas is deliberate. There's no clutter to complicate the AI's pathfinding, and they're densely packed with regions of interest that they can interact with, like covers, doors, and smart objects, with a variety of paths that they can take to flank you. But close quarter engagements mean that you can make use of the game's signature reflex mode to dish out a lot of damage in small windows of time. All of these systems lend themselves perfectly to tight, quick and dirty guerrilla engagements, where the element of surprise is constantly shifting in favor of each side. One of the single best combat arenas in the game sees you surrounded by multiple elevators, all announcing their imminent arrival as you prepare for the replica troops you know will come pouring out of them. So, when you find yourself in an arena where all that separates you and the enemy is a bit of cover and a whole lot of empty space, the tedium is most certainly palpable. Both sides just fruitlessly trade bullets back and forth until one wins. Mesmerizing. It's at times like this that the combat is at its most dismal, and for as much as I enjoyed the highs of the combat, its lows simply cannot be ignored. Enemies come in a variety of forms. Infantry exhibit a degree of diversity, ranging from lightly armored to how much fucking Vicodin are you on. They are occasionally accompanied by heavies that can take a much heavier beating, and for better or worse, are never joined by the replica assassins. The assassins drive a portion of the game's background tension, being responsible for most of the sounds you hear but can never quite make it in time to see, always lurking in the shadows, playing their own game of Splinter Cell. While they present a veritable source of tension during their first few appearances, it doesn't take much to get over your fear of them and figure out how to optimally respond. And since you only ever encounter them in isolation, they inevitably turn into the easiest threat to eliminate. Now, if they were to show up alongside standard enemy types, I think they could make for interesting decisions in the midst of combat, and would incentivize alternative strategies to deal with them passively via mines or forcing them to take certain paths via grenades. I don't think Monolith never considered this possibility. Maybe they playtested the scenario and found that it created undesirable outcomes and a degree of unpredictability that was more tedious than it was engaging. The last kind of replica trooper are the Rev 6 power armor units, bipedal big boys intent on being a nuisance. They disrupt the mood by pulling a Kool-Aid man and proceed to ruin everything by being a boring adversary. I don't think they have any weak spots with damage multipliers. They take the same amount of damage no matter where you shoot them. This, combined with the fact that they present no threat whatsoever given how easy it is to avoid their missiles, makes them a mundane chore to fight more than anything else. There's no real tactics involved to my knowledge, beyond just strafing and firing. Alright, there's another type of enemy, although I wouldn't really call them that. The Nightmares. They only show up in the last few intervals of the game and forewarn you of their appearance via spherical distortions, accompanied by what I can only assume is the sound of someone flushing a toilet 10 meters down an empty hallway. All they do is joylessly float over to you and vanish on contact, doing some amount of damage. While they aren't scary outright, I'll acknowledge that they do help amp up the tension somewhat and lean the atmosphere a bit more into the supernatural vibe, like phantoms that appear out of a dimension beyond our sensibilities. I'd appreciate it though if their use was more sparing, since they pose little threat and are all dealt with in the same manner. One of the obvious pillars of any shooter is its selection of weapons. Shooters of the era iterated on a trend of allowing the player access to an assortment of weapons at any given time. The ubiquitous infinity holster, as it were. F.E.A.R. bucked the idea of letting you hold 10 different weapons at once and restricted you to a meager 3 instead, though it retained a focus on ensuring the uniqueness of every single weapon so as to facilitate a variety of playstyles.
Weapon review.
Your typical starting weapon, it quickly becomes not so typical once you get your hands on a second one and realize all the coolness potential it has when combined with bullet time. This is a notion that's quickly shot down, however, due to the fact that ammo for it is almost nowhere to be found, rendering it a waste of a weapon slot the vast majority of the time. Additionally, dropping them only drops one pistol, leaving you without a second if you change your mind. When you're locked and loaded, however, they prove to be precise and perfect for mid to long range engagements. The second weapon you run into, and another staple of the shooter genre, the SMG is effective almost exclusively in close quarters, and given its low armor penetration is unsuited to dealing with the more heavily armored infantry you encounter. It quickly loses its place in your arsenal to more effective weapons, as in the rest of them. It also marks a trend for this game that I personally find quite annoying. I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but the SMG isn't actually fully automatic. It fires in consecutive bursts of 3 or so rounds, making it impossible to tap fire. In the course of gameplay, all this means is a couple more rounds wasted, so it isn't really an issue. But I personally find it to be far less responsive compared to what I expect from a full auto SMG. Perfect one-to-one control over when the bullets leave the magazine. The assault rifle is yet another staple of the genre, a big brother to the SMG that's far more stable and consistent in its performance, and can see a lot of use at a variety of ranges, especially when compensating for its recoil using reflex mode. Unfortunately, its low armor penetration and relatively high time to kill stacked next to some other weapons leaves it lacking in comparison. In addition to this, it too inherits the almost but not quite fully automatic nature of the SMG, which means it can cease existing for all I care. All it really has going for it is the abundance of ammo you'll find for it.
Fire? Didn't feel very friendly to me. I think that they were deliberately targeting fish.
And as if to compensate for how rubbish the preceding weapons were, the VK-12 exists to show them how it's done. Simple, straightforward, effective as all hell, the shotgun embodies the core tenets of F.E.A.R's combat philosophy. It doesn't demand focused fire or attention to recoil, nor does it require you to spend extended periods of time cowering behind cover. All it asks of you is to make each shot count and to make them count as fast as possible. All the while engaging in a rhythmic dance as you weave in and out of cover, never hanging around any more than you have to. Up close, it's capable of turning a standard enemy into a hazy red mist, which never ceases to satisfy. And as far as damage goes, it can be rather hit or miss. Sometimes it can take out multiple enemies with a single shot, others you can fire at a single target square in the face and he doesn't even flinch. I think enemies take only a portion of the damage they otherwise would during certain animations, but I have no way of reliably testing it considering the spontaneity of the AI. Were it not for that, the shotgun easily outclasses every other firearm in terms of raw damage output, bar none. Penetrator is a slow-firing automatic that fires bolts, hence the name. It also has the highest armor penetration stat, making it extremely effective stacked next to your other options. It's also the most accurate weapon in the game, with virtually zero spread when you're stationary. While this positive is greatly diminished when you're mobile, it can easily be countered via reflex mode or counter-strafing to dampen the spread, making it invaluable for quickly dispatching enemies at longer ranges. I'm pretty sure this launcher's name is some sort of math reference. See, it fires rockets in bursts, depleting your 15-round magazine in decrements of 3. Fired 5 times, you're left with 15 mod 3 rockets, which is 0. It's not exactly deep. Modulo operations are pretty common in computer science, and hell, maybe I'm finding a play on words where one wasn't even intended. But I've pointed it out, and I've substantiated it, therefore its existence has been validated. Wait, shit, wasn't this a weapon review? The Mod 3 multi-rocket launcher once again illustrates the obsession of whoever was in charge of designing these weapons with making them all burst fire. For fuck's sakes, a burst fire launcher, come on! These rockets are so woefully ineffective that it takes more than one to take out basic infantry, 4 to 6 of them to eliminate the heavies, and at least 11 for the power armor. At range, most of your shots aren't even likely to land considering how slow and inaccurate they are, the lumbering masses of explosive disappointment. You may as well just double its magazine size and make it fully automatic, like a designated anti-personnel explosive launcher of some sort. Wait, no, we have one of those! It is everything I just described and then some. Accuracy? Spot on. Time to reach target? Instant. Damage? It's alright. Ammo? Enough. Do I likey? A close contender to the repeating cannon, the Type 7 spits out laser slugs that incinerate whatever poor sod they run into. They zoom in far more than they really need to, for some reason, and have a decent kickback to prevent you from spamming its godly power. And it maintains that position of power, so long as you're not playing on the hardest difficulty, since damage reduction on Insane prevents it from one-shotting infantry, which is more of a nuisance than anything else, since it warrants switching out to another weapon to finish them off. I know what these are, you know what these are, your mother probably knows what these are. And all you need to know is that they work as intended. Same old, the proximity mine makes for a handy tool when it comes to taking advantage of the AI's planning system, and packs a decent wallop to suit. Oh lord, here we go. What the hell is this? Who put this here? Who on God's dying earth thought that a grenade that required you to unequip your weapon in order to be thrown and detonated was a good idea? And why would you ever use manually detonated grenades when proximity mines exist and don't need to be babysat in order to be effective? The only utility it serves is to be thrown out en masse in front of a heavy unit and detonated all at once. And this only works if you know they're coming to begin with, because once they're out there, all you can do is waltz into their line of fire and hope you don't die setting them up. Eat shit and die, remote bomb. F.E.A.R gifts unto you 3 sacred melee moves and one that's just there. A punch or a weapon whack which do a paltry 150 damage, and a bicycle kick, scissor kick, and slide kick that all do an ungodly 1000 damage a pop. Those numbers are only as high as they are to ensure you kill your target. It's kinda like how Destiny 2's finishers do damage that's a couple orders of magnitudes higher than what your other attacks deal. It's just there to guarantee that the recipient takes their L. These melee moves feed into F.E.A.R's spectacle aspect immensely. The slide and scissor kick keep your momentum going and feel fluid to execute, even from a standstill, and are obscenely satisfying to use. When they land! I've made quick saves to test the hit registering, and noticed that most of my attacks almost never connected unless I was aimed straight at my target. This may be a case of hitboxes not lining up with their models during quick animations, but regardless, why even bother using them when they're as inconsistent as they are? A major flaw with Gunplay, at least in my eyes, is the reload mechanism. I'm not talking about the animations or the sounds, but the way it goes about updating its values. See, shooters generally do one of 2 things here as far as the player is concerned. When you reload, the values either update at some point before the animation is visibly done playing, which we'll call a pre-completion reload, or they update after the animation is done playing, which we'll call fucking horseshit, because why would you do that?
Why are you gay?
The first method ensures that the player never has to look at their ammo counter to double check whether the values have updated or not, since the animation itself, or the click of the magazine, acts as a means of indirectly inferring whether or not you're done reloading. And in a lot of instances, this even introduces some additional depth by way of reload cancelling, wherein you cancel the tail end of a reload animation by interrupting it with another action like a sprint or a melee, so you can chain together more actions at a faster pace. However, when a game updates the ammo counter after the animation is done playing, things start to get kinda dicey. When I was specifying the 2 ways games go about this, I specifically said when the animation is visibly done playing, because sometimes the animation may technically still be finishing up and it's just moving really slowly. Whatever, no biggie, it's just an added delay. I can adjust to that, right? Wrong, because F.E.A.R does something exceptionally confounding. If you switch weapons in the middle of a reload animation, it queues up the weapon switch so that it happens as soon as the animation is done playing, but before the ammo counter has updated. So the next time you switch back, you'll find that the damn thing is empty. I have no answers, only questions. Anyways, as far as my loadout went, I stuck with a shotgun and the penetrator, switching between the repeater and particle cannon as ammo came and went. It allowed for, I think, my ideal playstyle. Running and gunning, taking almost no damage whatsoever, to the extent that the difficulty setting was almost a non-factor. And oh, what better time to poorly segue into the health system? Durability split into 2 statistics: health and armor. Some weapons are capable of bypassing a portion of armor and affecting health directly, others offer little to no penetration whatsoever. Of course, this works both ways. A boon in your hands, a bane in theirs. A lapse in judgment and you can quickly find yourself down and out before you've even noticed. Reflex mode is meant to assist you, helping you take your time lining up shots and reacting faster than the AI can. However, if you rely primarily on a defensive playstyle, it goes from an assist to a crutch. And this is just an assumption of mine, but I think that those that rely heavily on weapons that require sustained fire to be effective, like the rifle or the pistol, naturally lend themselves to a defensive playstyle. A high-risk, high-reward weapon like the shotgun, supplemented by the reliability of the penetrator, is what I consider to be the most engaging loadout. Trying to go gung-ho without them will likely see you inhale medkits like there's no tomorrow, as the longer you stay in a position that lets you fire at an enemy, the longer they have to fire back. As a result, you'll find a never-ending supply of medkits dotting each level, to the extent that you can find 2 to 4 of them in each combat arena, as opposed to armor, which is far scarcer in comparison. Given my playstyle, I never had to use one in the middle of a fight. I could just conveniently vacuum them up after I was done, which I presume saved me the frustration of having to monitor my health bar. Death in my case wasn't gradual. I either died instantly or took no damage whatsoever. There was no in between. Most of my confidence stemmed from the fact that I relied more on quick saves rather than checkpoints, so I didn't have to worry about redoing a few minutes of content every time I died. Regardless, while there may be an optimal way to play, the lovely thing is that you're afforded plenty of freedom in how you choose to approach each encounter. And isn't that what really matters in the end? Even though my way is obviously the cool. Also, here's a pro gamer tip. Whenever you pick up a weapon that you already have in your loadout, you get a minuscule amount of ammo compared to picking up a weapon that you don't have. So if you're ever hurting for munitions for your favorite weapons and you just spotted one that you can pick up, just toss it on the ground before picking up the spares you encounter. The game isn't designed with this in mind, but it makes power weapons like the cannons and launcher far more viable in standard play, seeing as though you seldom encounter ammo for them. If balance is your concern, I say to hell with it. You can always turn up the difficulty if you'd like, and the important thing about a game like this is to enjoy yourself, since the focus is squarely on cathartic gameplay. Maybe you watched this video not having played this game, and now you'd like to experience it for yourself. Or maybe you're reminded of why you loved it and are keen to reinstall it. Or maybe you're someone who hated it when you first played it and watched this video because it piqued your interest, and now you're willing to give it a second shot. But you gotta remember that this 19-year-old fossil of a game has some technical problems that you're gonna need to fix. First up, extreme stuttering. If you experience this, it's likely caused by the game overpolling your mouse and or keyboard, and is infamous for affecting Logitech hardware. The old solution was to just go to the device manager and disable HID compliant devices, but screw that noise. There's a downloadable dinput8 file you can drop in your game's install directory that takes care of the issue completely. There's Steam guides out there on the same, so if you find yourself having this issue, you know what to look for. Second, you may or may not experience crashes to the menu near the end of random intervals. I can't think of anything in particular that's responsible for it. The most widely recommended fix is to set all your graphics settings to minimum, reload the checkpoint, and complete the interval again. Before you trouble yourself with doing any of that, just head on over to your display settings in-game and enable force restart. It does what it says on the tin, and in my experience has eliminated the issue in its entirety. Third, if you choose to play this game at any resolution beyond 720p, you'll find that the HUD and subtitles quickly shrink in response. Fret not, there's a fix for that. Just apply as instructed and Bob's your uncle. And finally, if you prefer playing games in borderless windowed mode, which I do, just set up the game's launch parameters as follows on screen to get it to run at your preferred resolution in bordered mode. Then download Borderless Gaming, link in the description, and use it to force the bordered application window to release itself from its bordered coil and become one with the screen. That's all I know about potential technical roadblocks you may encounter, so if you choose to play the game anytime soon, I hope it helps. Alongside that, you may be accustomed to taking advantage of leaning to gain an edge on your opponents. As far as I'm aware, most folk prefer toggling the lean function rather than having to hold it. F.E.A.R only supports the latter, but there are ways you can simulate toggling. If you're intent on doing so, you'd first need to install Auto Hotkey. You can write scripts for it to generate custom functionality for different applications. I myself have used it to write a simple auto-clicker and bunny hop script in the past, and it proves its utility yet again by letting me define the following script to facilitate toggle leaning, as well as hold to aim, because by default the game needs you to toggle, and I have yet to find a game where I prefer toggled aiming, and have no idea why it used to be as widespread as it was a decade ago. Anyways, just retype whatever I've written here verbatim and run the script once the game is launched to enable it. And remember to close it from your system tray once you're done. And with that, we come to the conclusion of this retrospective video essay critique at whatever the hell it is. What is F.E.A.R? A first-person shooter survival horror video game released in the fall of 2005 that went on to establish itself as a beacon of inspiration, with plenty of lessons to teach for years to come. A game that elevated the spectacle shooter to new heights, shining a light on how the medium could capture the gritty, filmic aesthetic of action movies by bolstering player freedom instead of trying to constrain it. That made phenomenal use of contemporary technology in spite of its limitations to immerse and enrapture the player in an experience never before captured, whose accomplishments have cemented its status among the greats. This is F.E.A.R. Hey, you made it to the end. I suppose congratulations are in order for the both of us. If you've enjoyed this video, whatever the hell it is, and have some thoughts you'd like to share or questions you'd like to ask, the comment section is right there. That being said, I hope you got something out of this video. Feel free to subscribe for more critiques that are published once in a blue moon and are primarily about games that I play several years past their release. Cheers.